Hello again and welcome to In Taiwan We Speak, your audio guide to Taiwan's mind-blowing linguistic diversity. I am Alexander Shin, and this is the last part of our conversation with Kí Phín-tsì, a freelance linguist, Taigi translator, and co-creator of the Bite-Size Taiwanese podcast. Now, Phín-tsì, with our previous guest on Taigi, we established that there's no solid consensus on how to name this language, how to call this language, especially in English. Of all the names of this language, which one do you use most often?
I would say maybe Taiwanese. I think it makes sense to call a language that is most used. For example, in France, the most spoken language is French, and in Spain, the most spoken language is Spanish. So I think the most spoken local language among all other languages on this island, I think it's fair to call it Taiwanese in English. I know there are some people who might be against this idea, but but I think it's fine to call it Taiwanese, or otherwise just call it the way the speakers would call it. So for example, a lot of people would call it Taigi or Taigu. Even in English, I think that's another way, because we are respecting how people call themselves or call their own language. So I think it should also be fine to just call it Taigu, Taigi, or Taiwanwe, which is also very common. So I think these ones are what I would call them.
Now, what is your opinion on this? You know how in Mandarin sometimes, even in official texts, Taigi would be called Taiwan Taiyu. In English, would you accept Taiwanese Taigi?
I think Taiwan Taiyu is something really new, more like a political decision. Yeah, but in English, I think
Does it sound weird to you?
Taiwan Taiwanese. Yeah. It sounds a bit redundant or I don't know, a bit ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, if someone wants to translate Taiwan Taiyu, maybe that's one way.
Right. Now let's talk linguistics. Our previous series on Taiwanese had one very viral bit where we talked with Liz Lim about Taiwan's inclusive and exclusive we, the pronoun. And it seems like a lot of people are interested in that kind of discussion. Now, let's talk more about Taigi's linguistic features. What are some of the features or phrases or untranslatables that you personally find very interesting?
I think one of the special things about Taigi is that it's very melodic. So it's a tonal language with 7 tones, though some people might say 8, depending on how you count it. So just to simplify, we can say there are 5 long tones and 2 short tones. So the long ones are high, mid, low, rising, falling. So they sound like this. Dong, dong, dong. Dong, dong. So high, mid, low, rising, falling. And for the 2 short tones, one has a higher pitch than the other, and they sound like this. Dok, dok. So can you hear the difference?
No. I cannot.
And each of them are different words with a distinct meaning. So if you cannot tell the difference, you cannot hear.
Okay, give me the 2 short ones again.
Dok, dok.
Okay, so the pitch is different.
Yeah.
The shortness is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And beside the 7 tones, Taigi also has a very complex tonesandi, which basically means the tone of a word in isolation might change when it's combined with other words in a sentence. This is a huge topic that would take hours to explain or to cover, but I can provide maybe a simple example to give our listeners a taste. The word gu means old as opposed to new, so old. And in Taigi, we often reduplicate the adjectives. So for example, if we say the word old twice, it means something is slightly old. But instead of keeping the same pronunciation, same tone, and saying gu gu, we would change it to gu gu.
Also, even though it's the same character, just repeated twice,
Yes.
the tone changes. In
Yes.
the first one or in the second one?
The first one. So you can actually hear that the first syllable sounds slightly lower in pitch than the second. So gu gu. So it means slightly old. So you don't hear people say like gu gu. That would sound like you are a foreigner. And we can also triplicate this adjective. So if we say the word old 3 times, it means extremely old. But instead of, repeating the same flat middle tone like gu gu gu, it would sound like this. Gu gu gu, gu gu gu.
3 different tones.
Yes, so it would sound very melodic. Gu gu gu. So it happens to a lot of words like be be be, ang ang ang, o.
But also meaning-wise, I feel like it's a little bit counterintuitive. So 1 gu is old, 3 is extremely old, but 2 is not, in between. It actually means just
Like,
a little bit old.
Yeah, like o, blackish, a little bit black.
Old-ish.
Yeah, oldish, blackish, something like that.
Kind of old.
Kinda old.
Right. Now, Mandarin also has tone Sunday, right? In some words, tones change depending on what tone character is next to them. But I feel like there's only a short number of those rules you can actually summarize in a couple of sentences. Is it super intensive in Taiwanese?
It is.
So it would be an actual challenge.
Yeah, so almost every word has 2 shapes of the tone. So depending on the position in a sentence, it can sound like a high tone or mid tone, something like that. So it's more like a tonal grammar that you have to learn or you have to acquire. It's one of the most difficult part, I would say, for foreign students. But if you acquire it naturally as a native speaker, you don't feel it. But when you need to teach it to foreign students or when you are a foreign student learning Taiwanese, it's super complicated and it's hard to just cover it in 1 or 2 sentences because there are so many different rules and there are 7 tones, and on top of that each tone changes to something else in combination, so that's super complicated.
So for me, who's already struggling with 5 tones in Mandarin and minimum tone Sunday, I would find Taiwanese tonal system extremely difficult, I assume. Oh, so earlier you mentioned that Taiwanese is a melodic language. So is that why? Because tones
because
kind of make it more...
I think that's the reason, because you have rising tone, you have you have 3 levels of the pitch, and you have rising melody, you have falling melodies, and you also have the contrast between long tones and short tones. So I think that makes it very musical.
I can relate in that regard a little bit, because Ukrainians also pride themselves on calling their language melodic, because Ukrainian, unlike most other Slavic languages, has this vowel to consonant balance that happens a lot. And for example, we balance the sounds v and u just interchangeably. Like even the word Ukraine, Ukraina, sometimes you can say Vkraina if you have a bunch of vowels before the word and you want to avoid, too many vowels or too many consonants piling up. Yeah, so words like in or words like and each have 2 to 3 forms, just so that you can balance the flow. And it does make it melodic.
Yeah, and that sounds a little bit like tone Sunday, because, you have 2 forms for one word. Yeah, okay.
But it also, I bet, makes it difficult, because you have one thing on the dictionary and another thing when you actually need to attempt to speak it.
Yeah, that's the fun of learning a new language. Yeah, it's a lot of mental gymnastic.
Now, the book that you shared earlier with me, Short Takes, the scene-based Taiwanese vocabulary builder, how far in speaking Taiwanese would a person go if they study this book, from page 1?
Not too far, I would say, because we wrote this book with the idea of creating a vocabulary builder. So it's actually in the title, it's a vocabulary builder. So the main focus is to teach vocabulary. Of course, we have a lot of example sentences there, but it is a self-study book, and there isn't a lot of dialogues. So I think if you really want to learn how to speak Taiwanese, it's not gonna be enough. But I think if you want to learn 500 800 most common vocabulary, it's still very useful. But it's not good to just rely on one textbook. Try whatever way. If you are interested in learning this language, just try whatever way you can. Find a language partner, try to live in this country, try to explore whatever is out there on the internet, listen to pop songs. That would be more helpful. But of course, I hope people would find my book useful. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you, as the author of that book and the co-creator of the Bite-Size Taiwanese podcast, what would be your phrase to go to teach to our audience today?
Okay, so maybe I'll just share a beautiful word in this beautiful language and teach our audience how to say beautiful. So in Taigi, the word beautiful is sui. Sui. So for example, you can say Taiwan jin sui. Taiwan is beautiful. Taiwan jin sui. Or maybe li jin sui. You are very beautiful. Li jin sui. Or like, I don't know, the studio, this room. 这间房间真水. This room is very beautiful. Yeah, and the word sweet can also mean something wonderfully or beautifully done. So it's something like great job or excellent. So for example, say if you are watching a baseball game and your favorite team just hit a home run, so you can say 水啦, great job, 水啦. So in this case, we often add la at the end. 水啦 means great job, excellent, wonderful. So that's what I want to share with our audience today.
水啦.
水啦.
Love it. I would like to also share one phrase from Taiwanese that I personally find very useful, and I do use it a lot at home, and it's "Kam an ne."
Come on there.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave it to you to explain where it came from, but if I'm not wrong, it means "oh, really?"
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
I think I use this phrase a lot in English. Oh, really? So that's why I find "kam an ne" so useful. But I've realized that there's also a way to say it in a nasty way, right? Like, not in an aggressive, but rather passive-aggressive way. Is that true?
Yeah.
Like,
depending on your intonation, it can be like "kamane, kamane, kamane." This phrase actually got viral or popular because it's so frequently used, and it's used a lot in TV shows. And someone, I don't know who, just tried to put together short clips from, soap operas,
right,
of the same actress saying this "kamane" in different, different episodes, different shows. So they just try to put together all the tiny clips so you can see the same actress speaking the same phrase in all different emotions, in all different situations.
I've seen it. It's really funny.
Really? Really? Huh? Really? Are you kidding me? Yeah.
Kamane,
kamane, kamane.
If it's that clip that I've also seen, then she finishes with "kamane." The hysterical "kamane."
You saw it on the internet?
Perhaps. It was a lot on short clips on Instagram.
Yeah.
So people who don't speak Taiwanese, they still use this phrase as a slang.
I think so. A lot of Taiwanese expressions actually get into Taiwan Mandrin. So you hear people use a lot of actually Taiwanese long words. Yeah. So, for example, I noticed that Taiwanese people like to use the verb 巧 in Taiwan Mandarin, and it means like to just sort of move things around or push it a little bit, 瞧. So move something like to move it away from the original position. But we also use this verb to say that, okay, let's schedule a time or try to reschedule the time. So we use this verb a lot when we are talking about, to try to settle things down or try to schedule the time. So we use it a lot, even when we are speaking Mandarin. So, 我们来瞧一下时间，那件事情你去瞧一下。So we use that, but it's not a Mandarin word. So,
all right.
Yeah, and a lot of those Taiwanese expressions find its way into Taiwan Mandarin.
So they sort of enrich Taiwan's own Mandarin.
Yeah.
Right. Well, on that note, I think we're running out of time. Today, our guest was Kí Phín-tsì, a freelance linguist and Taigi translator, co-creator of the Bite-Size Taiwanese podcast. Thank you, Phín-tsì, for being with us throughout these 3 episodes and for your very valuable insights.
Thank you for having me.
And dear listeners, thank you for being with us. If you enjoyed our series, please give us some boost on social media and don't forget to recommend this program to your friends. And of course, do come back next week for another one of Taiwan's fascinating languages. Once again, this was In Taiwan We Speak, your audio guide to Taiwan's mind-blowing linguistic diversity. I am Oleg, and see you next week.